He thought leaking my performance review would destroy me, but the moment he smiled, I plugged in my laptop and everything changed. Stay with me. You're about to see how silence became the loudest revenge. My name is Mara. I'm 34 years old. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. The fluorescent lights above the conference room buzzed like flies trapped in glass, flickering just enough to make everyone's faces look a little washed out, a little weary. I could taste the metallic bite of stale air from the vent above me, mixing with the bitter scent of old coffee drifting from the break room down the hall. It was the kind of morning that already felt too long before it even began, one where every sound, every sigh, every click of a pen echoed like static against the glass walls. Across the long table, screens glowed with muted blues. Laptops snapped open, fingers clacked half-heartedly. The hum of conversation rose and fell in cautious bursts. Half-smiles were exchanged, the kind that lived somewhere between politeness and exhaustion. I caught snippets. Weekend plans, traffic, daycare drop-offs, all fragments of normalcy strung together before the show started. It was the last Tuesday of the quarter. Review week. Everyone knew what that meant. Performance rankings, budget discussions, the corporate ritual of smiling while being measured. And our manager, Kyle, loved it more than anyone. He called it Accountability Day. I called it Performance Theater. He always made sure the team meeting landed right before lunch, the perfect hour to hold people captive, too hungry to argue, too close to noon to care. He'd start with his usual smirk, maybe a story about his weekend golfing with a regional VP, maybe a dig disguised as a joke about how we all needed to pick up the pace. It was never accidental. Every meeting was a stage, and he was the director, our discomfort, his entertainment. That morning, he stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up just enough to look casual, approachable, hard-working. The sleeves were always rolled, even though we all knew he hadn't written a report or answered a client email in months. His version of leadership was rewriting other people's work and stamping his name on it. I watched him as he adjusted the projector remote, pretending to fix something. He didn't see me watching. His reflection trembled faintly in the glass wall behind him, layered over the skyline of downtown Denver. I could see myself too, faintly, shoulders straight, folder perfectly aligned with the edge of the table. My folder looked ordinary, neutral beige, worn at the corners, but inside it was anything but ordinary. No one noticed it, not yet. Then, ping. The sound cracked through the room. Every keyboard paused. Every head turned slightly toward the Slack notification hovering at the edge of their screens. The silence that followed was quick, sharp. I felt my heart give a single quiet thud. Then my monitor refreshed. A file appeared, shared to the entire team chat, labeled clearly, Q4 Peer Review, Mara Confidential. For a second, my brain refused to process it. The file just sat there, glowing in blue, waiting to be opened. I didn't move. Neither did anyone else. You could almost hear the static in the air between us. A chair creaked. Someone inhaled too sharply. I looked up. Kyle was already watching me. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't even pretending to be surprised. He was smiling, that kind of small, controlled smile that people use when they know something the rest of the room doesn't. "Oops," he said, his voice smooth. "Didn't mean to send that to everyone." No one believed him, not even him. The corners of his mouth twitched, betraying a flicker of satisfaction. He leaned back, arms folded, eyes bright, watching, waiting. Around me, the clicks began. One by one, screens opened the file. You could hear the faint taps of fingers scrolling through lines of text. The glow of monitors reflected off their faces like cold light through aquarium glass. My stomach tightened. It wasn't just my summary, not the sanitized bullet points HR normally shared. It was the full review, raw notes, comments, HR observations, even a line marked sensitive, pending HR action. My throat went dry. I hadn't seen that version before. I didn't even know it existed. The room changed then. I felt it, the subtle shrinking of space, the hush of people avoiding my eyes, the faint click of someone's tongue, the shuffle of another's chair. The air turned heavier, slower. Kyle didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. He wanted to watch me unravel. He expected tears or outrage, maybe both. He wanted to prove something, to remind them that power didn't belong to competence or effort or truth. It belonged to control. He thought humiliation would silence me, but all it did was sharpen me. I looked at the table, at the folder beside my coffee cup. My fingers brushed the edge of it. Inside that folder was something he didn't know existed, something I had held onto for 2 weeks, almost forgetting it was there. A mistake from HR, a gift from carelessness, my insurance. I straightened slowly, the leather of my chair creaking. The motion drew a few glances, not many, not yet. When I stood, Kyle's smirk faltered. "Since we're sharing," I said, my voice calm, almost too calm, "maybe the team should see yours too." That sentence hit harder than I expected. The words left my mouth like a quiet explosion. He blinked. Once, twice, then leaned forward. "Mara, let's not—" "No," I said. "Fair's fair." My heart was steady now. My pulse no longer raced. It pulsed in slow, deliberate rhythm. I walked to the front of the room, heels tapping against the tile in time with the air. Conditioner's steady hum. I could feel the heat of everyone's eyes following me. At the podium, I plugged in the HDMI cable. My laptop came to life on the big screen, replacing the corporate presentation with my desktop. Clean, minimal. One folder labeled Documents. Inside, one file. Kyle Performance Review Q4 Internal. I didn't need to explain how I had it. The title said enough. The screen flickered. The file opened. There they were. Lines of text, red flags scattered like wounds. Words that stripped away the facade he'd worn for months. Repeated complaints from direct reports. Failure to complete Q3 deliverables. Final notice. Requires immediate improvement. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Someone murmured, "Is this real?" Kyle didn't move, didn't blink. His hands hung loosely by his sides, fingers twitching like he might reach for something, but he didn't. He just stood there, the confidence draining from his posture in slow, invisible threads. I turned toward him, my voice still steady. "Seems like your performance hasn't just been a little off. It's been under review, quietly." The silence in the room became absolute. Even the HVAC hum seemed to fade. I scanned the faces around the table, the same ones that had glanced at me with pity minutes ago. Now their expressions were changing. Not sympathy, not shock. Something closer to recognition. Maybe even relief. I could almost hear their thoughts. Finally. "And since we're being transparent now," I said, "I thought everyone deserved the same honesty." No tremor in my tone. No need to shout. Just truth, spoken clean. Kyle opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the sound returned. Another ping. Slack again. This time, the notification wasn't from him. It was from Lisa. HR. Her name appeared beside a single message. "Kyle, please, see me immediately." The glass door swung open. Lisa's reflection cut through the light as she entered, her heels slicing sharp clicks into the tile. She didn't look at anyone else. "Kyle," she said, voice firm. "Can I speak with you privately?" He froze, eyes darting from her to the screen still glowing behind me. His own words stared back at him, damning in their clarity. No one laughed. No one whispered. Even the ones who loved office gossip stayed silent. I stepped aside, letting the scene play out. He looked at me once, searching, pleading, maybe angry. I couldn't tell, and then he followed her out. The door shut softly behind them. For a moment, the room just breathed. The stillness had weight to it. I walked back to my seat, the echo of my footsteps filling the silence he left behind. My coffee sat there, cold and untouched. I lifted it anyway, took a slow sip, and set it down again. Around me, the team stared, unsure what to say. I didn't need them to say anything. I had already said everything. They say silence is the loudest answer. That day, it screamed. After Kyle followed Lisa out of the conference room, the air didn't rush back in. It just hung there, thick, stale, unmoving. The sound of the glass door closing still echoed faintly in my chest. Everyone stayed seated, caught in a strange kind of paralysis, the kind that happens after an accident when your body still expects another impact. No one looked at me directly. Screens lit their faces in cold, artificial light. Some pretended to type, fingers tapping nonsense. Others shifted, cleared throats, moved papers that didn't need moving. The room was full of motion, but no sound. Just the whir of laptops and the occasional mechanical sigh of the ceiling vent. I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even sip the coffee that had long turned bitter. I just sat there, listening to the silence he left behind. 1 minute passed, then another. It was strange how long a minute could feel when no one wanted to be the first to breathe too loud. Then finally, Jonah, one of our junior analysts, spoke. His voice broke the stillness like a pebble hitting a frozen pond. "I had no idea," he said quietly. The words seemed to hang there, fragile and exposed. "I know," I replied. My voice was even, controlled. I didn't add anything else. There was no need. Every person in that room had just witnessed the kind of truth that rearranges a hierarchy. They had seen what Kyle did, how he'd framed me. The language in that review wasn't professional. It was deliberate character assassination. He made me sound uncooperative, volatile, resistant to feedback. Words designed to isolate, to make leadership see me as a liability rather than an asset. But those same people had worked beside me for 3 years. They knew the hours I pulled, the late nights balancing client deliverables, the weekends spent troubleshooting while Kyle bragged about his golf scores in Nashville. I didn't need to justify myself. The evidence had already spoken, and it spoke louder than anything I could say. The truth doesn't always enter a room with noise. Sometimes it walks in quietly and sits down at the table. That morning, it was sitting in every chair, weighing on every unspoken glance. Later that afternoon, Lisa asked to see me. Her office was on the 6th floor, HR's domain. I'd only been there once before for an onboarding orientation 3 years ago. The carpet was softer up there, the air cooler. There was a smell of lemon polish and printer toner, the faint hum of closed-door meetings. I passed the frosted glass wall with the word integrity etched in bold letters. It always struck me as ironic. When I entered her office, she didn't smile, but her expression wasn't cold either, measured maybe. Her tone was calm when she gestured toward the chair across from her desk. "You handled yourself well today," she said. I sat down carefully. I didn't want to cause a scene. "You didn't," she replied. "He did." She opened a folder, thick, heavy, and I realized it wasn't mine. It was his. "The file you presented matched what's in our system," she said, scanning a page. "We'll be conducting a formal review of Kyle's behavior, including today's incident." I nodded, keeping my hands folded in my lap. My pulse had steadied, but there was still a faint hum under my skin, like electricity that hadn't quite discharged. "I didn't plan to show it," I admitted quietly. "Not like that. But when he crossed the line." Lisa looked up. "You held your ground." There was a pause. Then she said something that made my chest tighten. "You've been recommended for promotion. Twice." He blocked both. For a second, the room seemed to tilt. The words landed heavy, heavier than I expected. I had suspected it, of course. Every ambitious woman in that office had stories of opportunities that vanished in vague HR language. But hearing it confirmed was different. It wasn't paranoia, it was proof. "I thought I was being paranoid," I said softly. "You weren't," she replied, leaning back. Her tone wasn't sympathetic. It was factual. And somehow, that made it worse. She closed the folder and set it aside. "We'll keep you updated as the review progresses. In the meantime, you're to report directly to me." That should have felt like victory. It didn't. When I left her office, the hallway seemed brighter than before, though I couldn't tell if it was the lights or the weight that had lifted. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. I caught my reflection in the mirrored door, tired, calm, unreadable. What I felt wasn't triumph, not relief, not even satisfaction, just stillness. A quiet reset. Like I'd been swimming upstream for years, and suddenly the current stopped, but my arms didn't know what to do. The days that followed moved differently. Coworkers were polite now, cautious, their smiles tighter, voices lower. Jonah started CCing me on every email he sent, almost as if seeking validation. Tara, who used to breeze past me at lunch, stopped by my desk twice that week, pretending to ask about project timelines, but really just testing the new balance of power. "How are you holding up?" she asked once, her tone half genuine, half curious. "Fine," I said, just focusing on the Q4 rollout. I smiled briefly, enough to end the conversation. They weren't friends, they were witnesses, and witnesses have a way of shifting their allegiance toward whoever seems to be winning. Reputation in that office moved like smoke, visible but shapeless, always curling toward whoever held the flame. By Friday, the whispers started to settle into patterns. People spoke softer when I entered the room, their sentences rearranging mid-air. Some said Kyle was suspended, others whispered, administrative leave. One rumor claimed HR had found patterned misconduct. No one said my name, but I could feel it, hovering at the edge of every conversation. I'd become a ghost story told in real time. That afternoon, I received an email notification. Meeting invite. Sender, Lisa. Subject, internal transition, confidential. 2 attendees, me, and the regional director. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. The light from the monitor washed over my hands, making my skin look pale, translucent. The world outside the office windows had already dimmed into the amber haze of late autumn. Denver in December always had that look, like the city was holding its breath between endings and beginnings. I read the subject line again. Internal transition. The kind of phrase that could mean anything: a promotion, a transfer, or the polite beginning of something much bigger. I closed my laptop, the click echoing in the quiet office, and sat there for a long time before leaving. The elevator ride to the 12th floor felt longer than usual. It always did when something was about to shift. That floor was different, like a separate world stacked quietly above the noise. The air was cooler, denser somehow, as if filtered through layers of authority. No chatter spilled from cubicles, no smell of reheated leftovers from the break room microwaves below. Just stillness, soft carpet, muted lighting, and polished mahogany doors lined with names that didn't appear in Slack channels. As the elevator climbed, I could feel my pulse in my wrists, steady but noticeable. Every passing floor seemed to echo a question I wasn't sure I was ready to answer. Are you ready for this? When the doors finally parted with a quiet chime, my reflection flashed across the brushed steel panels. My hair was neat, my blazer pressed, my shoulders straight. I barely recognized the version of myself staring back. The woman reflected there didn't second-guess her emails anymore or rehearse her opinions before speaking. She didn't shrink into apologies. She stood still, certain, waiting for the next move. Lisa was already waiting near the reception area. She wasn't smiling, but her expression was composed, as if she knew the importance of letting me arrive on my own terms. "Mara," she said with a nod. "Lisa." That was all. No small talk, no encouragement, just acknowledgement, the kind professionals exchange when words are unnecessary. She turned and opened a glass door to her right. Inside stood a tall man in a gray blazer. The city stretched behind him through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painted in a wash of winter light. He held a white mug with the company logo, the kind they handed out during new hire orientations. Somehow, in his hands, it looked official. "You must be Mara," he said, his voice calm, measured. "Yes, sir," I replied, crossing the room. His handshake was firm, controlled, but not performative. "Lisa's told me a lot about your work," he said, moving to the desk. "Your numbers, your record." He paused, studying me briefly before adding, "Also, about what happened this week." I met his gaze. "I'm not here to relive it," I said evenly. "Just to move forward." Something shifted in his expression then. Approval, maybe. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly as he set the mug down and took his seat. "Good," he said, "because we're considering you for a leadership position. Interim team lead, effective immediately. The words landed with quiet weight. My breath hitched, not from surprise, but from confirmation. The moment I'd imagined in fragments for years was finally solidifying into reality. It's not just about replacing Kyle, he continued. It's about course correcting. We missed things. He looked at the folder in front of him, flipping a page. Your record shows consistent high performance. He downplayed that. That's on us. For a second, I thought I might smile, but I didn't. I'd learned by now that victory shouldn't look like satisfaction. It should look like composure. What would the role involve? I asked, keeping my voice steady. He leaned forward slightly, forearms resting on the desk. Team oversight, direct reporting to Lisa, input on Q1 strategy and deliverables. He paused. But more than that, it's about stability. Your team needs someone who doesn't flinch under pressure. I held his gaze. The air felt different up here, clearer, thinner, like breathing higher altitude air after years in a crowded basement. I accept, I said. He nodded once, as though that was exactly what he expected. Then he stood, extending his hand again. Welcome to leadership, Mara. That night, I left the building just as the sun dipped behind the Tennessee skyline. The parking lot shimmered under the fading gold light, the kind that turns glass into fire. I didn't rush to my car, didn't pull out my phone. I just stood there, letting the wind cool the adrenaline still running through me. For a moment, I let my eyes trace the horizon. The downtown towers glowed faintly, their windows catching the last shards of sunlight. I thought about how it all began. That first day, years ago, walking through these doors after being laid off from a smaller firm, still clutching the fragile hope that this place would be different. I'd wanted belonging, growth, maybe even mentorship. Back then, Kyle had seemed like both mentor and model, sharp, confident, charismatic. He'd taken me under his wing, taught me shortcuts in reporting software, introduced me to clients, even bought me coffee on Fridays. It took months before I realized mentorship wasn't what he was offering. It was management by illusion. The slow erosion began in subtle ways. The small corrections during meetings that made me doubt my own slides. The way he'd polish my reports before sending them to upper management, rearranging sentences, changing metrics, and signing them with both our names. Over time, his name edged closer to the top, mine slid further down. When he started presenting my ideas as his own, he called it strategic alignment. When I hesitated, he smiled and said, Optics, Mara, optics matter more than truth. Then came the day he forgot my name on a client call. Called me Marcy in front of everyone, laughed it off, then never corrected himself. I remember how the client chuckled politely and how I smiled through it while something inside me cracked a little. I'd swallowed every moment, every insult disguised as mentorship, because back then I still believed that endurance was the same as strength. So when he leaked that review, when he tried to humiliate me in front of everyone, he thought I was still that same woman, the one who would absorb, adapt, stay quiet. He didn't realize silence was only the surface of control. By Monday, I walked back into the same conference room, but this time my badge carried a new title, Interim Team Lead. The small plaque hadn't been printed yet, but the authority was already visible. The subtle shift in how people moved when I entered, the way they straightened up slightly, voices lowering, eyes watching. Kyle's chair was gone. No formal announcement yet, no memo from HR, but the absence was unmistakable. His nameplate had vanished from the frosted door of his office. His personal coffee mug, the one that said, Batter One Boss, was missing from the shelf. Even his digital footprint was fading, files deleted, shared folders empty. It was like he'd been erased in real time. Tara was the first to acknowledge it. Morning, Mara, she said softly as I stepped into the room. Her tone carried a mix of caution and curiosity. Morning, I replied, setting my coffee beside my laptop. Jonah glanced up from his notes, offering a small nod. I opened my laptop and pulled up the Q1 planning sheet on the projector. The document's glow filled the room with a sterile blue hue. My reflection wavered faintly against the screen. I drew a slow breath, feeling every pair of eyes waiting for what I'd do next. "All right," I said. "Let's get started." No one interrupted, no nervous laughter, no background noise of Slack notifications. Just attention, steady, alert. For the first time, they weren't listening because they had to. They were listening because they wanted to. Power is quiet. At least, real power is. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand a seat. It simply walks into the room, and everyone makes space. The first week in my new role felt both familiar and foreign. The office looked the same. Same gray carpet, same sterile whiteboards cluttered with color-coded deadlines. But the energy had changed. Conversations dipped when I passed by, not out of fear, but adjustment. Everyone was recalibrating, learning the new order of things. No one said Kyle's name, not once, but his absence filled every corner like residue. On the shared drives he once monopolized, in the silence where his commentary used to cut through meetings, it lingered in the awkward pauses, the careful phrasing of coworkers still unlearning his tone. We started reorganizing immediately. Rebuilding wasn't loud, it was methodical. We redrew project timelines that had been bloated by his micromanagement, shifted leads to people who had been overlooked, tightened reporting lines so that accountability no longer disappeared into email chains. Each move I made was deliberate. Every decision a quiet erasure of his fingerprints from the team's structure. And though no one said it aloud, I could feel the shift in the air, like a collective exhale. The team began to trust the silence again. Meetings ran shorter, reports grew cleaner. The Slack threads, once cluttered with half-jokes and vague praise, turned clear and direct. People started taking ownership instead of waiting for approval that never came. Lisa met with me every other day. Her office had become our neutral zone, a place where strategy lived instead of politics. Quick syncs, sharp updates, no small talk. "You're stabilizing the team faster than we expected," she said one afternoon, glancing up from her tablet. I leaned back slightly in the chair, a paper cup of burnt coffee cooling in my hands. "I've been managing them unofficially for a while," I said. She smiled, a small, knowing one. "You just didn't have the title. Now you do." That acknowledgement sat heavier than I expected. It wasn't praise. It was truth finally aligning itself. Still, I kept the folder, the one that started it all. It lived in the bottom drawer of my desk, behind old training manuals and forgotten meeting notes. I didn't look at it often, but knowing it was there felt like keeping a scar visible, proof that I'd survived something I wasn't meant to, not because I wanted revenge anymore, but because I needed the reminder of how power tried to break me and how I learned to rebuild it in silence. 2 weeks in, an interoffice envelope appeared on my desk. No return name, no markings, just my name written neatly in black ink. I hesitated before opening it. Something about its weight felt intentional, too light to be official, too heavy to be meaningless. Inside was a single printed page, a Slack screenshot, Kyle's message, the same one that leaked my performance review. But this version had more. A thread I hadn't seen before. His own words, raw and unfiltered. "Wait until they see this. She won't recover." My chest tightened. For a long moment, I just stared at it. The timestamp glowed faintly under the fluorescent light, 10 minutes before the leak, 10 minutes before he hit send to the wrong channel. I turned the page. A sticky note clung to the corner. "For your records, you didn't deserve any of that." A friend. My throat went dry. I read the note twice, then again. Someone had known. Someone had seen him type those words, maybe even laughed along in the moment, but couldn't carry the guilt any longer. They'd stayed silent then. But not now. I didn't need to know who it was. Their courage, delayed as it was, had done its work. Because exposure, once it begins, never stops at one truth. By the end of the month, the tide turned. Lisa called me into her office again, closing the door behind me with that quiet finality HR uses before something serious. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried the kind of weight reserved for unfinished stories. "It's not just your review," she said. "We've had other reports come in." I didn't ask what they were, didn't need to. You can always tell when a system begins to eat itself. Sometimes revenge isn't a single act, it's a chain reaction. And once it starts, it moves slowly, deliberately, like water carving stone. Weeks blurred, meetings filled with metrics and projections and restructuring plans. The gossip thinned out, replaced by results. I focused on work, not whispers. But under the surface, I could feel the current shifting. Then came the all-hands meeting. The auditorium-style conference room smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and projection heat. People filled the rows in quiet murmurs, coffee cups balanced on knees, phones tucked face down in laps. I sat near the front, close enough to see the reflection of the slides on Lisa's glasses as she prepared to speak. When she began, her voice was steady, her tone neutral. The exact cadence HR uses when they're about to remove someone's name from the system. "We are committed to transparency," she said, her gaze sweeping across the room. "Effective immediately, Kyle M. is no longer with the company. No explanation, no dramatics. Just a clean, deliberate cut. The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was clarity. People didn't need context. They already knew. I could feel it. Dozens of eyes turning toward me. Not pity, not curiosity. Something different. Recognition. Respect. The room seemed to breathe in unison, a shared understanding passing silently through rows of chairs. When the meeting ended, people filed out in slow lines. No one spoke his name. They didn't have to. In the hallway, Jonah caught up to me. His expression was hesitant, like someone stepping into confession. "You okay?" he asked softly. "I am now," I said. He nodded, shifting the strap of his laptop bag. "I should have said something sooner," he murmured. "Back when You're saying it now," I said, meeting his eyes. "That's enough." He looked relieved, maybe forgiven. That night, the office emptied out early. I stayed late, finishing reports under the hum of the desk lamp. When I finally walked to the parking lot, the world was quiet. The sky had turned that deep shade of blue right before full darkness. The air smelled faintly of rain on asphalt. The lot was nearly empty, just rows of parked cars reflecting the amber glow of street lamps. I unlocked my sedan, but before opening the door, I paused. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder, the one that had followed me through every storm. Under the orange streetlight, the paper inside looked almost sepia, aged by time, by meaning. My eyes traced the line that started everything. "Final notice requires immediate improvement." A phrase meant to end his career. Instead, it began mine. It wasn't about revenge anymore, not even about Kyle. It was about ownership, about how I'd stopped waiting for someone to fix the injustice for me and rewrote the ending myself. They gave me his office, not right away, not with a ribbon or a speech, just a quiet facilities request and a new nameplate that slid into the slot beside the door. Mara Thomas, Team Lead, Operations. The letters gleamed faintly under the hallway lights, crisp against the brushed steel. For a long moment, I just stood there looking at it. My name, my title, the two things he'd tried hardest to control. It was strange walking into that space for the first time. The same layout, the same window overlooking the parking lot, the same faint hum from the ceiling vent. But the air was lighter now. The tension that used to hang there, those invisible threads of fear and manipulation, was gone. It was as if someone had cracked open a window after a storm. I didn't redecorate, didn't need to. The walls were still the pale off-white he preferred, the shelves still lined with generic corporate binders. But now there was no trace of his aftershave, no stack of half-finished golf magazines on the corner table. Only my things, my silence, my air. I unpacked one box. Inside, a single item I'd been saving for years, a framed quote I'd found at a thrift store back when I still doubted my own worth. She remembered who she was, and the game changed. For the longest time, that quote had lived in the back of a drawer. I never felt ready to see it daily. Maybe I thought it belonged to someone stronger, someone who hadn't been overlooked or silenced. But now it was mine. I placed it right where his monitor used to sit, So the first thing I'd see each morning wasn't his reflection in the glass, but my own. That afternoon, Lisa stopped by. She leaned against the doorframe with that familiar mix of poise and quiet observation. Her eyes swept the room, its emptiness, its new stillness, and she smiled. "Feels right," she said. "Yeah," I replied, setting down a pack of highlighters beside my notepad. "It does." She walked in, taking the chair opposite me, the same one Kyle used to dominate from, but her presence filled the space differently. Not with authority, with balance. "Just so you know," she said, crossing one leg over the other, "the board signed off on your permanent promotion." For a second, I thought I misheard her. "Permanent?" She nodded. "You earned it. It was interim, until you made it undeniable." She slid an envelope across the desk. Smooth, official, embossed with the company seal. My name printed in bold at the top. Inside, a contract, a salary adjustment, and a handwritten note in the corner. Reviewed and endorsed. Executive approval. I didn't open it right away. My hand rested on it for a long moment. Not to savor the victory, just to feel the quiet pulse of everything it represented. Relief didn't come in waves like I expected. It came like a single steady breath. Not pride either. Something smaller, steadier. Peace with an edge, because I hadn't just survived what he did. I'd rewritten it into the very reason I rose. The weeks that followed were about rebuilding, not revenge, repair. I restructured the team around openness. One-on-ones weren't performance traps anymore. They were conversations. I built an anonymous feedback forum, something Kyle would have called unnecessary noise. Now it was our safety net, our mirror, and they responded. Jonah began speaking up more. His reports got sharper, his confidence clearer. Tara, who used to shrink under Kyle's sarcasm, pitched a new workflow system during one of our staff meetings, an idea so strong it reshaped our operations plan. Even Mark, the skeptic who used to roll his eyes at every suggestion, started staying late, diagramming process fixes on whiteboards. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was real, it was honest, it was ours. Some days I caught glimpses of my old self in the reflection of the office glass, the one who used to double-check every line of an email before sending, who apologized for existing too loudly. I'd look at her and think, "You were always capable. You just needed the noise to stop." A month later, quarterly review week returned, the same cycle that used to fill me with dread, the same fluorescent lights, the same long table. But this time, I wasn't sitting 3 chairs down, I was standing at the head. I walked into the conference room early, coffee in hand, and glanced around at the empty seats. I remembered exactly where I sat that morning when Kyle leaked my review. How the air felt then, charged, humiliating, thick with pity. Now, the same air was still, balanced. As the team filed in, their footsteps soft against the carpet, I greeted each by name. No tension, just focus. When everyone settled, I began with one simple line. "Let's keep this honest and human." That was all. No theatrics, no speeches, just a promise. And they smiled, because they understood. For the first time, the room didn't feel like a stage. It felt like a team. We worked through metrics, targets, budgets, all the usual numbers, but something in the rhythm had changed. No one spoke to impress. They spoke to contribute. When the day ended, the conference room emptied slowly. Papers stacked, chairs pushed in, the low murmur of closure hanging in the air. I stayed behind, gathering stray coffee cups, wiping the table. The city outside glowed orange, sunlight spilling through the blinds in soft ribbons. The Tennessee skyline stretched wide in the reflection, distant and golden. I stood at the window, folder in hand. Kyle's folder. The one I'd kept in my drawer since that morning. The one that had once felt like armor. I opened it one last time, letting the papers breathe. The same HR notes, the same damning lines, the same phrase that started it all. Final notice. Requires immediate improvement. It was strange how those words no longer stung. They didn't belong to him anymore. They belonged to the lesson. He'd weaponized feedback. I'd learned to reclaim it. I walked to the shredder in the corner of my office. slid the first page in, watched it vanish in thin ribbons, the sound soft, rhythmic, almost like exhaling. Page after page disappeared until there was nothing left but confetti. The folder was empty. So was the fear that once came with it. Some stories don't need to be told twice, just once, loud enough to echo. He leaked my review to embarrass me, so I leaked his to end him. And in doing so, I learned that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it signs a promotion letter. Sometimes it just looks back through the glass of a corner office and smiles quietly at how far you've come. If this story struck a chord, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments.